You're watching Deprogrammed. As you know by now, this is the New Cultural Forum show committed to fighting back against the forces of ideological conformity, particularly among the young. My name is Harrison Pitt. I'm a senior editor at the European Conservative, and I'm delighted to be joined, as ever today, by Connor Tomlinson, the host of Tomlinson Talks at the lotuseaters.com, and our special guest this week, it pains me to say, former deputy leader of Reform UK, and no doubt known to you all, but Mr. Ben Habib. Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Harrison and Connor, for having me.
Thank you for coming on.
You've made some constructive criticisms about Reform's internal party structure, saying that the party needs to be democratized and the process of decision-making needs to be made more transparent. What are the problems as you see them, and how do you think we might go about addressing them in the next 5 years in the lead up to the next election?
So, Reform UK is the modern incarnation of the Brexit Party, which was put together in very short order in March 2019 in order to hold Theresa May to account and try and get Brexit over the line. And in the rush to create the party, it was set up as a limited liability company with 15 shares, 8 of which are owned by Nigel, 5 by Richard. This is all publicly available information. So Nigel is the outright controller of Reform UK. And I think that worked extremely well in the early days because it allowed, and it continues to work to this extent, because it allows decisions to be made quickly. You can move from one position to another seamlessly. There's no party structure which holds you back. And that's all great. But if you aspire to being a genuine political party, a proper grown-up political party where you're going to be part of the government or the government of the United Kingdom, you can't have it owned by one man. And it's critical, in my view, that if we stand, as we do in Reform UK, for the democratic unit that is the United Kingdom, and that we hold democracy dear, which is what we do, that we must ourselves have a democratized party. I think one of the problems with our two-party system, with the Conservatives and the Labour Party, is that both these parties have, over the last few decades, increasingly detached themselves from the electorate because their own memberships have been diminishing, and they continue to take the shilling of large corporations over and above and to the detriment of their memberships. And I think that's what's disconnected them with the electorate, and which is why the two-party system actually, fundamentally, was one of the main reasons why the two-party system isn't working, because the Labour Party and Conservative Party are no longer democratised in the way that they were. You know, the Conservative Party used to have 3 million members, I think, at one point.
In the 1950s, yes.
Yeah, and that means they were really acutely in touch with what the British people were thinking. And now we know that they're not in touch. And whilst Nigel has a fantastic intuition for what the man on the, the common man on the layman on the Clapham omnibus might be thinking, he may not always have that connection. And in any event, you've got to have a democratized party if you wish to hold high office. And so this is a discussion actually I've been having with Reform UK, initially with Richard when he was leader, before I joined the party. And
yes.
And I said I would only join the party if you democratise. And that was refused. And what I mean by democratise is Nigel gives up his shares in some way. You're never going to get a perfect democracy, but you can't have one man owning it. And my initial idea was to give a share each to the shadow cabinet. And they all held these shares as guardians of them, not with a personal interest.
Indeed.
But if they ever left the shadow cabinet, then they had to hand the share over to whomever joined. And that's not a perfect democracy, it's more like an oligarchy.
Yes.
But it shed, it moved power across a
it's democracy within the inner circle.
Within the party. And of course you can build on that. But my appeal for democratization in early 2023 was rejected. And so I got a letter from Richard in which Richard made some salient promises to me, including that the party would be run on a consensual basis, which is the closest I could get to it, being democratized. And on the basis of that letter, I joined Reform UK. But of course, when Richard left as leader, the letter had no force. And so when Nigel came back, I then texted Richard and I said, it's crucial that at the end of this election, we democratize. it's fair enough, we'll go through the election. This is not the time to re-engineer the party. But once we get through the election, particularly if we do well as we expected we would, if we get seats and so on, it's crucial we democratise, because it makes a nonsense of being Reform UK. How can you be Reform UK if you're an inherently unreformed entity?
Yeah, and if you're not updating your internal procedures to meet circumstances, and there's a difference between being a pressure group, where you're right, swiftness of decision making is key, and trying to be a credible party of government that's in touch with the people whom you claim to represent. And so I suppose that before Connor comes in here, the one question I would ask you is that, of course, on a sort of in a constitutional basis, in other words, just analysing the formal structure of reform, this leaves a lot to be desired at the moment. What practical consequences do you think that lack of democratisation is having, which are regrettable?
Well, it's regrettable that I'm no longer former leader. I mean, that is something that is, of course, entirely at Nigel's prerogative. That is natural. And
I agree with you.
Nigel has the right to do what he wants. But we need a shadow cabinet. We need one urgently. And I don't have to be in it. That's fine. But we've got no mechanism by which to appoint a shadow cabinet. We've got no committees that produce policy. We've got no structure that remotely resembles an organisation that wishes to hold high office. And we need to get on with that urgently. I know Zia Yusuf, the new chairman, is talking about branch structures. And it was interesting. He sent out an email the other day, I don't know if you saw that, from Reform UK to all members of Reform UK, saying that they are setting up branch structures in a democratised way. And I can imagine that these branches will be democratised. They'll have their own local representatives and mechanisms to raise money, etc. But the nerve centre needs to be democratised as well. And there was a conspicuous absence of any declaration in favour of democratising the party itself.
I see.
So let's say that Nigel's not necessarily amenable to democratising the party in the way which you would recommend, and it remains a kind of kingdom or fiefdom, which, of course, has its benefits for campaigning on hot-button issues and making executive decisions. Whether or not those decisions are always prudent, like removing you from your post, should be debated.
Yeah.
My concern is that the greatest kingdoms need courts, and I don't know who in Nigel's vicinity is giving the best messaging advice or the best policy advice. I really did quite like the contract with the people, but there have been criticisms that it hasn't gone far enough in international institutions, for example. I don't know who's putting those concerns to him. And I don't know if there is a recruitment pool open yet for those grassroots level campaigners, or as well, a kingdom needs an heir apparent. Nigel's made lots of noise about how he might want to get out of it after the 2029 election, which I think is maybe a mistake on messaging as well. You know, before you've act like the king in waiting, not the king that's looking to appoint your heir.
You become a lame duck immediately.
Yeah, and nobody wants to see that from Nigel Farage because he's got charisma. Who would the heir be, for example? If I'm looking around at the field, I can see maybe some ambitious folks, but nobody necessarily who manifests the concerns of the people in Boston, Skegness or Clacton or Ashfield like the current MPs are. So even if it doesn't democratise, who has Farage's ear? What's the recruiting ground for an heir? Is that there even without the democratisation? Because I can't see that at the moment.
I don't know is the frank and honest answer. I don't know how decisions are made at the moment. I genuinely don't know.
It doesn't encourage me yet as a prospective member. So recently I was publicly kicked out of the Conservative Party in what I think is an effort for the consensus that has lost them the last election to shore up the defences and stop someone like a Suella Braverman from being elected as a leader.
They actually threw you out as a member of the Conservative
Yes,
Party.
publicly. They didn't tell me why. I assume it was just a greatest hits list of all of my social media posts. And then Richard Holden resigned like 2 hours later.
Right.
And so obviously I've been thinking, I'd like to take my acumen elsewhere if it's useful.
Yeah.
And then like a day later, they removed you. They appointed Zia Yusuf chairman, which there was some concerns that loyalty wasn't being rewarded, for example, because you stuck with the party when it wasn't necessarily popular and took them from low in the polls and possibly redundant after Boris had promised to get Brexit done to being an electoral tour de force. And so,
I mean, Richard and I put the party on the map, no doubt. Absolutely. We spearheaded that effort. Absolutely.
Quite.
Thank you.
No. I was gutted, frankly, as someone that was that supported you in the election, was looking to lend my hand there. And so it's a difficult question, but I may be asking, is there any encouragement you can provide that concerns of people like me will be listened to and addressed rather than being given a you treatment worthy to try and involve themselves in the party?
So can I just clarify something? I think you said that you'd been publicly removed as a member of the Conservative Party.
Yes.
Did you mean Reform UK?
No, Conservative Party.
No, Conservative Party.
Conservative Party.
I had only stayed in because I was reporting on the conference every year for the sake of my viewers, and because I wanted to say in the leadership election, and because they were party of government at the time, and now deservedly not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you know my views on the Conservative Party.
And they're all correct.
Sorry, what was your question?
Is there any encouragement that the top are receptive to your concerns or mine, whether it's on democratizing or whether it's on courting potential members of the youth that are concerned about these issues?
I just don't know. It seems to me self-evident that you can't stand in 2029 to be the government of the United Kingdom, which, by the way, I think Reform UK could be. I think it has all the wherewithal, the position, the movement is now in full swing. If it makes the right decisions between now and 2026, I think you've got to do a lot between now and 2026, because you can't be restructuring the party in the run-up to an election. You need 3 good years of just nailing that 2029 election. If they do the right things, Reform UK could be the government. No doubt. You know, we came second in 98 seats on a shoestring. We got 5 MPs on a shoestring. One of those MPs wasn't even expected to win. He didn't campaign. And it tells you that the electorate, well, it's hilarious, but it's true. And it tells you the electorate is ripe and just so desirous for a new force. And so Reform UK has a very fertile ground, for the 20. It's got to make the right decisions. And one of those things is not letting the movement down, standing firmly behind the movement, making the arguments that we promised we would make for that movement, not leaving the battlefield. I think it's absolutely crucial Nigel stays on the battlefield. Absolutely crucial. He is now the marshal of our troops, and the troops are looking to him to lead. So I think that's crucial. I think democratization is crucial, because we can't go into 2029 saying, yeah, we're a fiefdom, but actually we promise we'll democratize the UK and get rid of all these anti-democratic structures. Excuse me, and we're not a presidential system. We're an executive kind of system. It's not about the individual ultimately. It's about, having the right policies, the right team, etc. So there are challenges, and I really hope Reform UK meets those challenges. And it's not about me, by the way. Of course, I'd love to be an active player, but push me out of it. Get the right people, get the right policies, stay true to the movement, democratize, and challenge for office in 2029.
One thing I have noticed is that you're right. That so far there have been very precious little in the way of signs that Reform is wanting to democratise its internal structures. But one word which is bandied about a lot, another adjective, another verb, is professionalise. And on the surface, that sounds like a good thing. And if by that you mean make sure that there's sort of quality control for activists, you haven't got the sort of kooks sort of worming their way into the movement and then representing it in a constituency and then embarrassing you when Hope Not Hate go through their, history feed. Yeah. Often, of course, kowtowing to Hope Not Hate is not legitimate to do at all. But you do want there to be a certain message, discipline, a certain professionalism about the way that people operate. You want the optics to be strong. And so if professionalism means that, then that's all well and good. My concern is that professionalism is a kind of euphemism for message and for message dilution, and so you're getting a lot of strange counter-signalling from certain figures. For example, Richard Tice recently, who's obviously a very well-meaning man, and of course, as you say, he showed a certain amount of magnanimity in stepping down, and indeed he did a lot to keep Reform on life support from 2019, when, as Connor said, it seemed redundant to most people, and then as its redundancy proved not to be the case, he's done very well.
I mean, Richard's been superb. I don't want to he put £1 million plus into this,
which is why I'm caveating what I'm about to say.
Yeah, sure.
But he said I think it was on Talk TV or some other outlet, that we are the party of true diversity.
It was LBC.
It was on LBC,
and he was as I've mentioned to you before, using yourself and David Bull, both deputies at the time, as regime-approved body armour in saying that, well, one of my deputies is gay and one of my deputies is not white. And I immediately thought, look, knowing Ben's rhetoric, specifically when you go on GB News and say, no, the only racism in this country is against the white Anglo-Saxon host population, I was thinking he might not have liked that.
Well, I personally think it's not the right thing. The big elephant in the room, of which we're all aware, is the protected characteristics that minorities now have in the UK, whether it's ethnic minority or religious belief, sexual preferences, transgender, whatever. There's a protective blanket that's been put round those characteristics, and it's verboten to not just criticize these people, but you're obliged to promote and celebrate all those protected characteristics. And that can only manifest itself in the diminution of the rights and benefits of the majority, because you can't promote and celebrate a particular minority if you're not damaging the majority. It goes hand in hand. And so I am blind. I am genuinely blind. I was brought up to be blind to colour, religious beliefs. Religion is something that people should keep in their back pocket. I don't want people to wear it on their foreheads. I don't want it out in public. It's something that's a private matter. And your sexual preferences, equally, do whatever you want, behind closed doors, not my business. Everyone's a human being. If you're a British citizen, you stand equal in the eyes of the law. And, so I think it's not helpful to identify the party as being diverse. And I can't bear it when I used to not be able to bear it when Sunak used to say, we're the most sort of diverse government ever in British. Who cares? It's still a lousy government,
Well, I do think what perhaps reform should recognise, even though it's a difficult thing to do, is twofold. That one, diversity is often used as a synonym for non-white, and that is somehow great, even though it has led to the proliferation of various immigrant communities that commit violence against the authorities in the places they live. I mean, we've seen the Hare Hills riots. We saw the Bangladeshi mobs running through the street that Nigel said, import the subcontinent and you get the politics of the subcontinent. Why is anyone surprised? We should be framing this as a sort of tribe or test of friendship. I mean, for example, you've said that your own dad is ethnically Pakistani, your mother is ancestrally English, your dad married into the tribe, you've married into the tribe, your son's married into, this is a proof of friendship rather than just living outside of the English tribe. And the other thing we have to recognise, I think, as well, is in campaign messaging, who is your constituency? Are we trying to win over the sensibilities of SW1-approved media outlets who will always call you racist no matter what you say? Or are we trying to represent the concerns of the left-behind indigenous English community who also have ideas, because the ideas didn't just come from nowhere, they have ideas as the host population that is much more like what you've said in that, public-facing religion is not something we want to contaminate with politics, or we are tolerant of eccentrics as to your sexual preference, that other places and other peoples and other cultures in the world don't have. So we should put those people who are going to be tolerant of those minorities first, rather than the minorities themselves. And I don't get that. I get that message from sometimes Lee and Nigel when he was on Jordan Peterson's podcast. I don't always get that message from everyone else who, as soon as they're called racist, they go, no. We've got Ben and David here who mean that we're immune from that, for example.
And it's also much more damaging than that as well, though, because what it is, it's an implicit concession to a very important pillar of woke discourse, namely lack of diversity equals racism, which is not a standard that I want sort of right-wing politicians to be entrenching in the public mind.
The woke mantra that you've just espoused, that is inherently prejudiced.
Indeed.
Yes. So I think one of the biggest threats facing this country is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the Conservative Party will say they don't want to discuss it because it's a thing of culture wars. And they diminish it by saying that. But the culture war is not a minor issue. It's a major issue. And if you don't have a settled culture, you don't have a society, you don't have a nation state. I don't know if they've read the definition of a nation state, any of these members of the Conservative Party, including very senior members who should know better, that in order to protect the nation state, you have to have a settled culture, you have to have a shared set of values. This is critical. So if you're going to have immigration, you've got to have immigration in numbers with which the nation can cope. And by coping, what I mean is you've got time to integrate, and so that they are brought into our value system and our cultural system, and that they meld, as you said. You know, it was interesting the way you said it, that my father had married an English lady. I'd never seen that as a hand of friendship, but of course that's what it is. You're buying into the tribe. And that's absolutely right. There shouldn't be ghettos of ethnically Pakistani people or ghettos of ethnically Indian people. We should all live cheek by jowl, and there should be no preference in the kind of girls, if you're heterosexual, that you fancy, whether they're, you know...
These people should be as unnoticeable in all relevant respects as the Huguenots are today.
Absolutely.
No one notices that there's no Huguenot community which has a sort of pressure group or which sort of does sectarian politics. We represent Huguenot interests. We want more Huguenot nurses. We want more Huguenot football managers. You don't get this happening because that process of assimilation was fundamentally an ancestral one. And I think even Nigel Farage himself is descended from Huguenot immigrants, and it does not inform his politics in the least. Whereas when you don't get that kind of intermarriage taking place, which I believe to be the true form of assimilation, and you just trust that values will do it for you because we'll have really hot civics programs, and these people will sort of buy into the propositional content of what it means to be British. That you're onto a loser, because these values might be desirable at a certain abstract level, but they feel a sense of possessiveness over them because they don't regard them as theirs. I think that values are important, but values have crucial demographic underpinnings, concrete underpinnings. And what would it even mean for people in Leeds today, or for people in Bradford, to assimilate into Britain, given that the local host culture has been completely demolished? It doesn't exist anymore. There's nothing to assimilate into. You can't just put copies of John Fortescue through every single letterbox and hope that everyone's going to... You know.
I mean, we've got a massive struggle now as a country to settle ourselves.
But are we beyond talk of assimilation at this stage?
No, I don't think we're...
Do we not need a pause like what the Americans did in the 1920s, just a complete freeze on immigration?
Well, absolutely. We've got to absolutely bring the shutters down on immigration.
Yes.
Absolutely. We've got to stop it. And those people who say the Brits aren't prepared to work, we need immigrants for work, they're talking garbage. Absolute rubbish, the Brits aren't prepared to work. Give them a shilling, remove the shilling that they get by not working, stop benefits being a career option, and Brits will work.
Yes.
It's an absolute nonsense that we can't manage our own workforce. And I think you're absolutely right. We've got to bring the shutters right down on immigration, even if there's an economic hit. We've got to take that hit in order to protect the integrity of our country. We will cease to exist.
Yes.
Western civilization. Suella Braverman said it brilliantly in Washington a few months before she was sacked. And I don't know if it, was part of the cause of her being sacked, but she said Western civilization faces existential threat.
Yes.
That's what we're facing.
Yes. And do you sense that urgency in the upper echelons of reform? They get that, you'd say?
I think they get it. I think I'm sure they get it. What they need to do, I think, what we need to do, what reform needs to do, is there are two approaches to that. I'll illustrate it with the Palestinian riots, or demonstrations, or whatever you want to call them. There are two approaches to the demonstrations. The first approach, the knee-jerk response, and I think not the right response, is to take draconian measures against demonstrations, require that riot police turn up in all their gear and on horses with armoured vehicles.
The full French option.
The full French option. I don't think that's where we want to go. And we as a party mustn't espouse that, because I think that will play into the continued accelerated destruction of our society. What we as a party need to do is identify the causes of the dysfunction that we see manifested in these marches, identify the causes, and then have proper grown-up solutions for how we deal with those causes, and relentlessly argue that. And at the heart of that is obviously the rolling back, repealing of DEI regulations, getting rid of the Equalities Act, getting rid of the concept of social justice in the Companies Act, which allows these ridiculous things to be manifested, including getting rid of quangos, where all these ideologies have become embedded, and of course, crucially, our educational system. And these are we need to draw those dots together, plus shutting down shutting down immigration.
Yes. Well, this is a question I want to ask you, and I've said this to you before in private, but my read on the situation is that I agree you want to repeal all those DEI laws, including, I might add, many of the ones that the Conservatives brought in. It's a little known fact that in 2017 the Conservatives didn't just not repeal the Equality Act, they actually expanded it, and it's partly because of that expansion in 2017 under Theresa May, I believe, that we have a much sort of larger DEI bureaucracy. I think we have the largest DEI bureaucracy, both private and public, than any other country in the Western world. It's pretty extraordinary per capita, obviously.
Yeah.
So that's obviously a concern. So we want to get rid of DEI, certainly. But my question to you would be, I don't think it's enough not to be trumpeting the virtues of diversity. I think that what we need to be doing is being explicitly anti-diversity. And the reason I say that is because it's a pattern that we observe across the world. In all countries that are homogeneous, identity precedes politics. There's this first person plural that Roger Scruton talks about. There's a sort of, there's a sort of unquestioned we exist as a people, and it doesn't make sense to sort of balkanize us because we're the same.
I mean, that is the definition of a nation state or a society.
Indeed,
yeah.
and they create a state in order to serve their interests. In countries which are hyper diverse, politics becomes about identity, and everything in politics, whether it's a football manager, everything in the culture, whether it's how many football managers are black, or how many of this group win Oscars.
It's like getting on Sky News, some guy getting on Sky News and saying the entire female football team is white.
Exactly. Yes,
I mean, why is that an issue?
Why is that a problem?
Yeah.
That politics becomes about identity. Identity doesn't precede politics; it becomes about identity. Do you think that we need to be much more explicit, not just in terms of saying we're not going to do DEI, but actually being quite anti-diversity, or maybe better put, pro-homogeneity?
I think we absolutely have to drive for a cultural melting pot, as opposed to diversity in the celebration of different cultures. We've absolutely got to drive for it. What you can't do, of course, is force people to marry each other in order to create what you want.
Yes.
But what we've got to be is much, much prouder of who we are, and we've got to educate our young and our adults on our great traditions, our history, our great institutions, our terrific values, and drive that message home. I mean, I know it's not... Yesterday we met the great David Starkey, and he was saying, and I was saying yesterday, you'll recall, Harrison, that we should sing the national anthem at school. And he said that's not very British. But I think it's time we did just get a bit more British, because we've got to drive that messaging home. Every country I go to across the world, pretty much, sings their national anthem at school. It's not subliminal even. It is getting the buy-in of children to their national identity. And we've got to do that. Sure, we're a nation of 4 nations, and we've come together, and it's a consensual arrangement, and it's unique in a sense across, in the world. But we are British. There is something that goes with being British. And as much as we might poke fun at the Scots, the Welsh, and the Irish, and so on, they're our brethren, they're our kin. And we have very many shared cultural and other things with them, and cultural values and so on. And we've got to drive that home. So what we mustn't be doing, you and I have discussed this before, is teaching our children that all our forefathers were slave traders. We've got to teach them that they were great entrepreneurs, inventors, exported great technology. We were responsible for the agrarian revolution. We were responsible for the industrial revolution.
But I agree with you, Ben. But if these immigrant communities have not assimilated at the level of intermarriage, then when you speak language about our forefathers, can't appeal to them.
No, but it's a very difficult process from where we are.
Yes.
The march back to a settled culture is going to take generations. This is not something that we can fix overnight. But you've got to put the building blocks in place overnight. And that Reform UK could do if it formed a government. And those building blocks are the kind of building blocks I've just described. And then just keep hammering the message, and then people will. There will be interracial marriages, and there will be more people like me.
Not a bad thing.
This may be a point of pessimism, because I don't wish to pour water on your passion, because being frank, I'd much rather you were steering the ship than a lot of the woollier people in politics right now. But when you say we don't want a French option, me, as a young man, staring down the barrel of ethnic and religious hostilities, which I would frankly rather live without, and the demographics not being in our favour because of mass immigration policies that successive Labour and Conservative governments, including the ones now, want to continue, I don't see...
The French option, look, what I was saying was Reform UK should not be espousing the French option. The French option may be something which we will have to, by dint of necessity, undertake. But it's not something I want to do. As a nation, I want to avoid that, you know.
But in avoiding it, I don't know if we can avoid it just through education. This is my concern.
Well, no, but I mean, I totally agree with you. If we get violence at these marches, if they desecrate our national monuments, if they threaten people who are wearing, overtly Jewish clothing, they've got to be absolutely held to account.
Yes.
Under the law, as if anyone else would be. There cannot be two-tier policing. One of the reasons we've got two-tier policing, and we go on about it a lot in Reform UK, and again, I think we need to draw the problem out. The reason you've got two-tier policing in this country is because the police are continually told that you're racist against ethnic minorities. The police are being criticised for it all the time. I, in my entire lifetime, have never met a racist white police officer. I haven't. I've always been treated with great courtesy by every officer. I may not agree with the laws they're enforcing, but they've enforced them, at least as far as I'm concerned, when I'm stopped on the road or whatever when I was a young man, with courtesy and politeness, and I've never felt threatened. And so the police are encouraged into two-tier policing. So this is what I meant, Harrison, about the building blocks. A critical first building block is to tell the police, enforce the law, and you're blind to ethnicity. Don't care what colour the people are. And Sadiq Khan should be sacked. You lost your membership for whatever tweets you put out. Sadiq Khan should be sacked by the Labour Party for saying that at least 40% of the Met should be from an ethnic minority. That is overt call to prejudice.
On Spotify, they were running adverts saying, police your community to look like you. I was getting them all the time because I was too cheap to pay for premium. Sorry, why should the police be policing according to melanin content?
And I can't say this because it's not true to my ideology, but the knee-jerk reaction to that is say, well, actually, I'm going to put white officers everywhere and, like it or lump it. But that's equally bad.
But it's not just white, it's English. This is the difference we have to make. That they're putting us down in the mud of black, white, brown, etc. It's like the host population is the English population, and they have the ideas that made it so attractive for newcomers.
But Sadiq Khan is calling for non-whites.
Exactly. Yes.
That's what he's calling for. So my knee-jerk reaction, which is the wrong reaction, the knee-jerk reaction is the wrong reaction, is to say, well, sod you, Sadiq, this is what we're going to do. And the other thing I think that makes him worthy of being... there are many, many things that make him worthy of being sacked. But the other one is putting that photograph out. You'll remember that, won't you? Family of 4 white people, a couple of parents and their children, and saying that this white family doesn't represent London.
Depends which areas you're talking about now, sadly.
Yeah, but they still represent London. Even if it's only 40% of London, they represent London. And they will continue to represent London. And it's that kind of divisive stuff that needs to... So I know we're all, we're in danger of violent agreement here, so there's no point continuing the discussion. But you know what I mean.
I do, yes.
But the police have to be draconian, sadly, where they have to be draconian, and they must do it without fear or favour. It is not something I welcome or something that I particularly like, but...
It may have been rendered necessary.
It may have been rendered necessary.
But this is the thing I'm concerned about. And okay, so again, I think Connor's absolutely right to emphasize the English dimension to this and the British dimension, like speaking us about as an ethnic group rather than as a race, because I'm not particularly in favour of being colonised by Albanians either, and they seem pretty white to me. So white is a kind of misleading category to be using it. I agree that you're only using it because the other side uses it. So it's incredibly clumsy. But the question is this: sort of the indigenous white British population have gone from being the unquestioned majority, almost exclusivity in their own homeland,
the besieged,
to being one community interest among many, and an exceedingly vilified community
besieged.
interest.
I mean, I think under siege.
At what point does it become morally permissible for us to do identity politics in return, not in a knee-jerk sense, but in a highly strategic and tactical sense, a sort of realization that, gosh, we find ourselves, as you say, besieged. It seems to me that it is morally permissible for groups, when they are under threat, to react in sort of, to play some form of identity politics. I mean, for example, no one would say, this is an incredibly extreme example, I'm not drawing a direct comparison here, but no one in a million years would say that Jewish people in Poland weren't allowed to play identity politics in the 1940s. Of course they were. Of course they were allowed to do that.
Or now. Following
indeed.
October 7th.
Following October 7th. And so groups have interests. It's not just individuals who have interests. And to the extent that those interests are threatened, it seems to me that it is morally permissible for them to react and organize accordingly. And you would agree with that?
I mean, it's a very, very sad end when that happens.
Yes.
You know, we've got to relentlessly drive for harmony. We've got to relentlessly drive for it. And I hope it never gets to the position that you've just described. You know, you mentioned the Jewish people. It's really interesting. I went to Hendon the other day, and I was talking to an entirely Jewish crowd about the Palestinian marches and how the Jewish community now felt through 200,000 Jewish people in this country feel threatened by what's going on the streets and so on. And I called out DEI. And I thought that I would naturally have a sympathetic audience because they would see how DEI has worked out for them. But they were against me. They saw DEI as a positive thing because they felt, or at least a significant contingency in the group that I addressed, or DEI as a positive thing because they felt it afforded them some protection. But what they haven't, and I clip this and please send it to the Jewish community, what they haven't taken on board is if you give protected characteristics to a group of people, any minority group within that protected category actually is extremely vulnerable to the majority in that protected category. Because they're protected, they're not challenged. The majority in the minority are not challenged, and they then rule the roost over every other minority in the protected characteristics band. Are you with me?
I'm with you, yes.
And so DEI is working absolutely against the Jewish community in this country.
Yes.
And if you can be the biggest community in the DEI protected family,
you benefit.
You are the top dog. The majority can't challenge you, and no one in your own group can challenge you.
Indeed so.
And
They would be better protected by the accommodating English host population rather than the various
Absolutely.
ethnic enclaves. Because, as well, the English
Absolutely.
host population feel the weight of the Second World War resting on their conscience. This is why they're still signed up to the ECHR and the United Nations Refugee Convention and the like. For Muslim imports who live in their own communities, who have religious grievances against Jews, also don't buy into that historical narrative, and so they have absolutely no qualms about projecting those slogans onto the Elizabeth Tower. And so under the rubric of diversity, you've brought in the anti-Semitism of the 40s, where if you had sustained the homogeneity of the accommodating English population, Jews wouldn't be under threat.
yeah, absolutely. And that's where we have to go. That's where we have to get back to. And so that's what I want to relentlessly drive for. And if we can avoid the kind of kickback from the indigenous population, I would like to avoid it. If we can avoid, bloodshed on the streets because the police have to take very draconian action, I hope we can avoid it.
Let me just say that. So there's kickback and then there's kickback. So what I meant by that, I wouldn't be a sort of no holds barred moral permissibility in organising collectively, and sort of, in other words, the white British population can react to this the way in which they've been besieged. There's nothing they can't do. There's nothing that's not morally permissible. That I wouldn't want to embrace that. But I mean something more similar to what the Israelis have. So there's an understanding in Israel that it would be a disaster for Jews to become a minority in their own ancestral homeland, and that their property rights, their self-determination rights, their interests could not be guaranteed under such precarious, fragile, precarious and indeed threatening demographic conditions. What I mean by organising collectively is just us developing a similar understanding about the importance of us being the unquestioned majority in our own homeland.
Absolutely. And we've just got to accept that. Our politicians need to buy into that. and they need to protect it. And that's why immigration has to stop.
I see. Okay, so we're agreed. That's what I meant by organising collectively.
Yeah, no, I agree. I absolutely agree. With this, the culture that needs to be promoted is the culture with which I grew up, not the one that's manifesting itself at the moment.
Indeed.
Which is almost anti-British.
Let's pivot a little bit to other things that reform could potentially do better, because we're all very delighted at the breakthrough they've made at this general election. I think it's really positive, and I think Connor and I are both excited about what could be unburdened by what has been. No, I won't say that. Too tempting. As soon as I was saying it, I had to.
I don't know what she means by that. Does she mean just stop?
I don't think she knows.
I think she's just trying to fill the air.
But she feels it. She obviously thinks it's a good statement.
She's been reading too much Michelle Obama, probably. That's probably what's been going on. Do you think that there's so what we're talking about here, I suppose if we had to kind of, what the general theme at the beginning of our conversation, Ben, is how do you go from being a populist insurgency movement to a credible party of government? All populists seem to have founded on this problem. I would argue, I heard Wilders in the Netherlands, Giorgia Meloni's founded on this problem, but the only person I can see who's sort of succeeded at being populist at the level of content, but then becoming the new establishment. So this is what happens. Once you become the party of government, you relinquish the underdog status with which the word populism is rightly associated, and you can't be doing populist methods anymore. A good example would be Caesar. When Caesar was crossing the Rubicon, he was acting as a populist, but by the time that he'd won at the Battle of Pharsalus, and he was in a position to show clemency towards his former enemies, and he became, dictator of Rome. I'm not saying we need a Caesar figure, but I'm just saying that's an example of populism being successful. You need to be willing to relinquish that underdog status. My concern with reform is that they seem to be leaning in a great deal at the level of their sort of messaging into that underdog status, talking about how we need proportional representation, focusing, in my view, too much, not to say constitutional matters are unimportant, but focusing a little bit too much on tweaking the system from outside rather than trying to infiltrate the system and manage it in a way that's maximally effective and can be engineered towards their own ends. Do you think that this is a transition that Reform are struggling to make?
Well, I think just on the PR point,
yes,
Nigel and the senior management should be looking at the election results, and they should be realizing, having looked at the election results, that PR is not required. And in fact, they're going to get many more seats under first past the post if they play their cards right.
Absolutely.
And, second in 98 seats, 4 million voters. We would have got 6 or 7 million voters if we could have entirely debugged the Tory message that a vote for reform is a vote for Labour. We didn't fully debug that. There are millions of people out there who would vote reform now, with the Tories already having been pushed off the battlefield.
You met some in your Wellingborough constituency.
I met them all the time.
Yeah.
They said, we desperately want to vote for you, but we fear Labour, so we're voting Tory. I just think, that is just a disaster. But I think people
is that what you said to them?
No, I didn't. But, one thinks internally. I wouldn't want to judge anyone's voting intention. But we will find it much easier to tap into those millions now because they see the Tories are broken.
Yes.
They see Reform has a chance of making a government. Forget the PR thing, but you're never going to get PR. The minute you're in a position of authority, you won't want PR.
Exactly.
So PR ain't happening. And PR has, I think, chopped Meloni off at her knees, chopped Geert Wilders off at his knees.
Potentially, we'll
we'll find out. But he's already saying stuff, which I think, Geert, come on. At least be anti-EU. Meloni and Geert Wilders have been cut off at the knees because of PR. They've had to compromise their positions dramatically, their initial positions dramatically, in order to hold office because they've had to do deals.
Indeed.
To get into a coalition. And that's not what the United Kingdom needs. One of the things we haven't discussed, and which I think is really critical, is that people understand that we are facing an existential threat. An existential, for those people who don't know, because I got challenged on this, what do you mean by existential? So I'll just say, what I mean is our very existence is threatened. And if you don't get that, you don't really fully understand why it's urgent that reform is true to the movement. It's urgent that reform reforms. It's urgent that reform gets into a position where it can form a government.
Yes.
And it's urgent it stays true to its ideology. I want to talk about populism for a second in a moment. But once you realize we face an existential threat, you do not want PR. Because PR will prevent you from being able to save the United Kingdom. You must have first past the post. Reform has to be a strong government. It has to be able to deliver its message. And Reform, by the way, is not a populist party. And I know people say that you're populist, you're right-wing. I don't think we're either. We had this discussion on right-wingery yesterday. I don't see myself as right-wing. That may be a surprise to you. Inherently, I'm obviously for free trade. Inherently, I want low taxation, less state intervention. I want aspiration rather than dependency. I don't believe in all these benefits that are being paid out, making it a career choice and so on. If that's right-wing, then perhaps I'm right-wing. But the battle for today is between globalism and the destruction of the nation state and those of us who wish to protect the nation state and promote the nation state and have the settled culture, which we've been talking about. And that is not a populist position. That is an ideological position. I would hold that view even if 100% of the population other than me in this country held the opposite view.
Correct.
I would still be shouting from the rooftops, saying you guys need to listen because you're about to face you are facing an existential threat. And so I'm not a populist. I'm an ideologue, and I will not bend. I will not bend. I don't care whether I'm in office, out of office, in reform, out of reform. You will hear the same message from me. And even when the tide is out, and I'm 85, and let's say we've lost our battle, and I'm facing death, I'll still be thumping the table with the same ideology.
So I agree with you. So it's populism, in terms of trying to nail down what populism means as a substantial set of what we're about. I mean, you get left-wing populists, you get right-wing populists. I'm talking about populism as a method. So as a
as a political method to galvanize people into action.
Indeed. And so populists have generally, and Matt Goodwin talks about the distinctions between different kinds of populism, this feeling of themselves as sort of pressure groups, sort of throwing sort of flashbangs into the establishment. What they struggle to do is become part of the establishment and to infiltrate it properly. And what I'm saying is that this excessive focus on constitutional questions, not that they're unimportant, but this excessive focus on constitutional questions, reconfiguring sovereignty in some way, they do still smell of a certain underdog status. And I'm saying, do you think that populism at the level of method, reform needs to make that transition?
I would drop it. I wouldn't make a transition. I'd drop it right now.
Yes.
We are now part of the political fabric. Reform UK is not an insurgency anymore. It's got 5 MPs. It came second in 98 seats. It could have 120, 130 MPs.
Yes.
And that's what we've got to be targeting mainstream political office. We've got to be in office.
Indeed.
And but I don't think we should be doing a deal with the Tories. I just want to get that clearly on the table.
I was about to ask you anyway, but that's good.
They're infected. I mean, that would be the politically expedient route to office. It would be as bad as having to do it's like doing a coalition.
Yes.
I'm against a coalition. I want Reform UK to have unfettered ability to deliver its agenda. And if you get into bed with people like Tom Tugendhat and Tobias Ellwood, I think he lost his seat, didn't he, Tobias?
He did, yes.
But there are others who are still there.
Kemi Badenoch, the presumptive leader of the Tory party, who despises Nigel personally.
Yeah, I mean, Kemi is a funny one because she would like to paint herself as being on our side of the debate. But the singular test for me that she failed was being given the responsibility to remove from our statute books 4,500 EU regulations.
The bonfire, as Marc Francois said,
The bonfire. And just to be clear, it's a fine point, but it's an important point. These regulations are not directives that were sent from the EU, debated in Parliament and brought into British law in an appropriate, I put in inverted commas, appropriate manner for the United Kingdom. These regulations are regulations made in Brussels and put onto our statute books without parliamentary scrutiny.
Yes.
And they have to go. We are infected with a form of European civil code which is undermining our great institutions, undermining our culture, undermining our economy. And these regulations have to go. It was a basic test of whether she was truly up for it, and she failed that test. So Kemi Badenoch needs to be treated very, very tentatively.
I might have my chronology slightly wrong, but another test she failed, whether it was prior to that test being failed or subsequent to that test being failed, was the fact that when she was made Minister for Women and Equalities, her first move was not to liquidate her own department. That's not a conservative department even to have.
Yeah.
You shouldn't even be heading a department with that name. You should be liquidating it upon arrival.
Yeah.
And that's, again, too often, both at the level of leading that department and in terms of her language, she does actually fall in, she actually fights the enemy on the enemy's own terms. And when you do that, you win in a sort of short-term sense, but in a long-term sense, you lose monumentally.
Well, you're conceding the argument, actually.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So the modus operandi of reform, trying to win a government outright in 2029, as we've already said, should be the party of the host population and the considerate culture that they put forward that incorporates folks like your father or the Jewish community into the tribe. But the question that people like Matt Goodwin have proposed is, how sizable a demographic of the country can you capture in those red wall Labour heartlands when you still have what is perceived to be a Thatcherite economic policy? I very much like the contract with the people, particularly the family policies, as someone who wants to, despite the housing situation in this country, get a house and have kids with my fiance in the imminent future. But there's still lots of people in the Labour heartlands who feel almost like a sort of Marine Le Pen style policy, which I know Nigel himself said he is against, would be preferable. What do you make of that thesis?
So, two things. The first is, and I suspect the Labour heartlands are acutely aware of this now, that Labour doesn't represent them. That Labour has no policy that suits the working class in this country. Keir Starmer can't even define what the working class is. He literally struggles to do that. They're so disconnected from the purpose for which they were invented, the Labour Party. So that's the first thing. And Nigel is brilliant at connecting with that constituency. I think he does it better than anyone, certainly better than Richard and me. And so Nigel's fantastic on it. And then the other point I would make is, and I touched on it earlier with you, Harrison, is that I don't see myself as, I mean, if at one level I'm right-wing in the sense that I want small state, low taxation, aspiration over dependency, etc. But I don't see myself as right-wing because I recognize that if I'm to be a politician, I actually had this kind of intellectual debate with myself when I went into politics, was that if I'm to be a politician in a democratic country, the only constituency for which I should be fighting are the working and middle classes, not the elite. The elite can perfectly well look after themselves, whatever we do, actually. They can leave the country if we get it really wrong. And we want to keep the elite here, by the way. But you should only be in politics if you care about the working and middle classes. And the way I think about the policies, economic policies in particular, that we should be putting out, we've talked about culture a lot, so let's just talk about economy. The way I look at the economic policies being put out is to allow social transition as much as possible, to allow aspiration to take root over dependency. Dependency is a deeply distressing condition to be in. Everyone wants to get up in the morning thinking that they can be whatever they wish to be if they work hard. If you get up every morning and the brightest future you've got is collecting your unemployment benefit, as it was in my day, from the local post office, that is not a life that I think anyone would be happy with. So I want aspiration. All the policies are driven so that when you wake up in the morning, you think, great, I'm awake. I can't wait to engage with the world so I can better myself, better the lot of my family, and make sure my children have a bright future. That's the essence of the economic policies that we should be fighting for. And our signature economic taxation policy is to take 6 million working class people out of the tax net. That's huge, by increasing the threshold at which tax is paid from 12,500 a year to 20,000 a year. And that's critical. It's critical for the benefit of those people, but it's also critical to get rid of this dependency culture because it will attract people off dependency into work. It's therefore also critical, Harrison, because it helps address the need for immigration. Because if people are aspirational and they want to work, you don't need immigration because the British are, the 6 million people who are on universal credit are coming back into the workforce. And that's critical. So if you want to win the culture war, you've actually got to make a new economic contract with the British working class. That's vital if you want to win the culture war. And I think Reform UK understands that. I think Reform UK understands that we've got to deliver for the working and middle classes. And I say middle classes, virtually everyone now in the United Kingdom is working class. So damaged is our wealth creation. Our GDP in real terms per capita, is less than it was in 2010. That's a shocking position for a country to be in. In real terms, per head, that's a shocking position to be in. Of course, we're going to have a broken labour market and so on. So our policies have got to get people back into work. We've got to wean ourselves off cheap imported labour, and we've got to champion the labour heartlands, because Labour ain't doing it.
And if you slash those benefits, you prevent a draw for a lot of the mercantile immigration that we're getting that arrive in the country and subsist on social housing. For example, 72% of Somalians in Britain are on social housing.
So this is a really interesting point you make, a really valid point. In my day, when I was a young man, I'm still young, but when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, the immigration that was happening was from really economically aspirational Pakistanis, Indians, whatever. They were coming here because they really wanted to work hard and get into the British system. And they did not like benefits, quite proud people. And what you're now seeing is a new form of immigration, which is being illegal and legal, coming to the UK to just get onto the benefit bandwagon. And that is a disaster. And that's just offering nothing of any significant, nothing of any benefit to the UK.
Well, listen, Ben Habib, it's been brilliant, very enlightening, lots of wise counsel. Hopefully it's heeded in the places where it matters. Thank you for joining us on Deprogrammed.
Thank you for having me.
Connor, thank you as ever. You've been watching Deprogrammed. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment if you wish to do so, and we shall see you on the next one.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.